Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is January 10th, 2024, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So let's go quickly over a map update. There aren't many things to cover, but I still thought it's important to do it once in a while. Again, compared to last year, evidently things have really slowed down, and both sides, of course, are having more difficulty trying to grab a lot of territory because the war has changed. Both sides have been able to build strong defenses, and so pretty much the future of the battles will be very much small, low territorial gains. However, in Avdiivka, we already know that the Russians are all in. They're trying to capture this city at all costs, and although, as you can see here on Deep State, the map has not changed, there's one thing I wanted to talk about around Avdiivka, especially what I noticed in the last few weeks, is the Ukrainians, of course, provide us with a lot of great drone footage. Their scouts flying these drones and filming these Russians. They're getting obliterated by Ukrainian FPV drones, artillery, or Ukrainian Bradleys or tanks. We've seen multiple videos of Russians just lying dead in the fields of Avdiivka. That is no surprise to us. But what has increased, and what I've started noticing in the last few weeks, is massive Russian suicides in this area, in Avdiivka. So now we get more and more footage of Russians that are wounded, injured, just deciding without hesitation to kill themselves. They just use a rifle, point it at their head, and then they just shoot. And it's been very surprising because back, it was happening even beforehand, but a lot less, and we weren't getting that much footage from, the battlefields seeing Russians committing suicide. And now we're seeing a massive amount of footage with, Russians just without hesitation committing suicide. It just indicates that they would rather commit suicide than put their hands in the air, surrender, and get treated humanly, decently by the Ukrainian side. And there's also obviously been a lot of brainwashing ongoing on the Russian side. Their commanders are telling them that if they're going to get captured, that pretty much they're going to get cat tortured. They give out leaflets showing what the Ukrainians are doing, which is complete, utter BS. But their mind is that, well, we're doing this to the Ukrainians, so the Ukrainians are going to do this to us, right? So unfortunately, Avdiivka is just littered with orc bodies, and that's just not going to change. But I just thought it was interesting to note that there has been an increase of Russian suicides, especially in the general area of Avdiivka. But that trend doesn't change, isn't just applicable to Avdiivka, but other front lines as well. Apart from Avdiivka, which hasn't changed in the last few days, of course, there's also the south of Donetsk. So south of Avdiivka and Donetsk, the Russians have also launched an offensive in the last few weeks, and the biggest sort of news for the Russians is that they captured the town of Marinka, which is pretty much entirely under Russian control. So the Russians are trying to push out the Ukrainians, again, leading their offensive on this main road, and the next target for the Russians is going to be Geopolitics. So this is going to be the next village, and of course the Russians are trying to exert control over the fields and the roads outside of these villages as well. Another update is that even more south of Marinka, the Russians have captured a little bit of ground here. It's kind of between Vuhledar and Marinka. So you can see here that Deep State has updated this as under Russian control. So this is north of the village of Solotke. And I think this is because how close the Ukrainian positions are to the railway line that the Russians are surely using to resupply its forces in Volnovakha. And obviously this then connects with all the other crucial towns and villages that the Russians control. Volnovakha, if some of you might remember, in the early phase of the war in February, March, there was massive battles ongoing here. The Russians were desperate to capture the town, and they did indeed capture it, unfortunately. And because this is an important railway junction for the Russians. So I think this is the main reason why the Russians have tried and successfully pushed out a little bit the Ukrainians from, closer positions to Solotk and Stepne, which are right beside this railway line. So the Ukrainians have some fire control over this railway line, so the Russians are trying to push them out more and more, essentially, getting the Ukrainians driven out, and then potentially even attack Vuhledar from a different position that would be less suicidal compared to what we've seen last year, with the Russians going head on to Vuhledar and getting obliterated and having some of the biggest losses, last year. So that's the situation in Donetsk, Avdiivka, and the south. Another thing is, obviously, I've been talking about Robotyne and Kharkiv direction, where the Russians have gained the momentum back, and now they're trying to push out the Ukrainians out of, honestly, the key village right now is Robotyne. So the Russians are trying to really capture Robotyne. They've been putting a lot of pressure here. So far, the Ukrainians are holding the main line that they had since the summer. But of course, the Russians are gaining a little bit of fields around this main axis, which was under the Ukrainian momentum between summer to fall of last year. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is, of course, Bakhmut. So this is another Russian offensive. Right now, to be fair with you guys, there haven't been any changes on the map. In the south of Bakhmut and the north, the only thing that has changed is that the Russians, being that they control a little bit more ground in the south, you can see that they have moved some of their troops and brigades closer to the front line here, close to Klishivka. So this is the next target for the Russians. They're going to try to do everything to grab Klishivka and perhaps control the heights of Klishivka. So the Ukrainians are trying to do their best right now to hold the line here. And also in the north, there is an attempt to take the village of Bogdanivka. You can see that the gray fighting area is currently kind of halfway divided between the Ukrainians and the Russians. So there's a lot of fighting ongoing between the Ukrainians and the Russians in the area of Bogdanivka, north of Bakhmut. And the last thing I want to talk about is obviously the Lysychansk and Kupiansk line, so north of Kharkiv and Luhansk. The Institute of Study of War indicates that Russia wants to build create a 15-kilometer buffer zone in the entire north of Kharkiv to push out the Ukrainian artillery, which is present. And essentially, the Russians are trying to really push out the Ukrainians, not only in Kupiansk, but most likely will, from what I understand, try to do some offensives around even the Kharkiv, the city of Kharkiv, and other villages here. So the ISW are, kind of warning us about a potential Russian offensive north of Kharkiv as well. But I seriously doubt that the Russians would be able to really do a lot of damage, because they're already having a lot of trouble even taking the small village of Sinkivka, which is in the way for the Russians, along many other villages afterwards, to take Kupiansk, which is geographically at this point, I think, impossible for the Russians to capture, unless, they move all of their troops throughout the different front lines that they have in the south and in northeast of Ukraine to Kupiansk to take the city. So right now it's just hopeless attempts by the Russians to try to take Sinkivka and push towards Kupiansk, and I think it's a dream for the Russians. And also in this direction as well, there's been a massive increase of Russian suicides because, while it's the same tactics in Avdiivka and anywhere else, the Russians are going head on towards well-defended Ukrainian positions. They get obliterated, many of them wounded, and they have no more hope but to commit suicide. So truly a tragic story, because most of these men have been brainwashed, and, thinking that 2 years ago they probably were going to school, were hanging out with their families, their friends, having their jobs, and now, they're dying senselessly without any real reason in Ukraine. So that is the tragedy. The human loss on both sides is truly tragic. But I have very little sympathy right now for the Russians, because they very well know where they're going, and they're very happy in destroying Ukraine and exterminating the Ukrainians. That is the main goal for Russia. It's a total extermination of the Ukrainian population. It is very evident by their actions, in the last few years, especially in the winter terrorist campaigns that the Russians have been waging against Ukrainian civilians. Now, aside from the map, so I hope you guys enjoyed this map update. Again, nothing has really changed. Small little territorial gains, mostly for Russia, but the Ukrainians are holding the line right now, hoping that they can muster enough forces and weaponry for the summer of 2024 but now with the F-16s. So we'll see if that's going to actually happen this year in the summer, and seeing a Ukrainian offensive. Now, the UK intelligence also confirms that Russia has been indeed bombing its own city. So there's been a lot of reports in the last few weeks since end of December of 2023 that, there was a village in Russia that got bombed in Voronezh Oblast, in this Oblast. Another aerial bomb fell in the town of Rubizhne in Luhansk, and some other, random bombings going on in Russia. And so the United Kingdom intelligence confirms that the reason why it's happening is because of inadequate training from Russia's side and the crew fatigue, causing them to cause these massive mistakes, bombing their own town. So let's hope that they continue on doing their great job in Russia. So the other news as well, and that was reported a few days ago, so I'm a little bit late, but it wasn't confirmed on January 8th. So in the somewhere in Nizhny Tagil, which is very far away in central Russia, close to the big city of Yekaterinburg. So we're talking about like very, very far away. So this is in this area in Sverdlovsk Oblast. There was a railway, basically a railway depot that was struck. Now, nobody really understood what happened, but now there's a confirmation that this explosion that happened at this railway depot, which destroyed 9 fuel tankers, was the result of a bomb that was placed underneath of one of those fuel tanks, which resulted in the blast that occurred in the railway depot. And obviously, being that this was a bomb that was placed underneath a fuel tanker, most likely this was the result of a Ukrainian sabotage group or someone that was pro-Ukrainian at the very least. So unfortunately, or fortunately I should say, this happened, but Ukraine again needs to be able to reproduce these types of situations regularly, almost on a daily basis, blowing up these railway lines, these railway cars as much as possible. If that can happen on a daily, even on a weekly basis, I think that would start making a difference at stopping the Russians being able to move their supplies through a railway to Ukraine and then resupplying its forces in Ukraine, evidently. So it's good at least to see that there is some Ukraine activity or pro-Ukraine activity in Russia. And you guys remember a month ago or so, there was another massive explosion that occurred in the tunnel that essentially was a critical railway connection to China, which Russia was using to most likely move critical goods from China to Russia. So, Ukraine just needs to find a way to reproduce these types of situations regularly. And the last news I want to share with you guys is sort of just kind of rumor. According to some European Union politicians, they're saying that Trump vowed, so in some private conversations that he's been having with them, he vowed that he would never help Europe if Europe was attacked by whoever. And we know that most likely this is going to be Russia. If they want to attack Europe, it's going to be Russia. It could be very well the Baltic countries. It could be Moldova next. It could be something else. But Russia has not shied away from its ambitions to continue on their offensive after Ukraine. So, I'm not surprised about it. And this is just some food for thought for my American viewers. The decision that you will make for this year will really shape our world for the next few decades. And I've talked about it in my previous video, so my last video, I think on Sunday. But really, this is going to be one of the most important elections in US history, at least in the last few decades. It's really going to set the stage as to which direction the United States wants to take. Does it still want to remain a superpower that sort of tries to keep the peace around the world? Or is it going to become isolationist? And that is a decision that is to be made by the Americans. And I hope that, the right decision is going to be made, because if I believe the United States decides that they no longer want to be involved in foreign wars that are created mostly by dictatorships and regimes that just want to conquer territory through acts of violence, then we're going to have we're going to have frequent situations like that. It's not going to be just Ukraine. It's going to continue. It's going to start happening in Taiwan, in the Middle East, in, Eastern Asia, in Japan and South Korea with North Korea. being very aggressive right now as well. So, that is the question to my American viewers. So it's unfortunate that Trump seems to be very aligned with, removing it himself or the United States completely from NATO, from helping Europe, and pretty much being buddy with Russia and other dictatorships and regimes. So that is the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed my update. Again, let me know if you have any comments in regards to any of the topics I covered today. If you enjoy my videos, subscribe and subscribe to my channel, like my video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much, and Slava Ukraini!